Welcome to Locums Wise, taking you from where you are to where you want to be. I'm your host, Mark Poole. In this episode, I'll be discussing what is locum tenens and why would anyone want to get into it. So let's get started by answering the simple question, what exactly is locum tenens and how does it work? The term locum tenens comes from a Latin phrase meaning to take the place of. It's a temporary role at healthcare facilities that doctors and mid-levels like PAs and nurse practitioners can often take. It's a lot like traveling nurses, although that's not usually called locum tenens, that's just called traveling. When doctors and mid-levels do it, it's called locum tenens, or locums for short. It could be anything from a weekend shift to weeks on end, even months, or perhaps indefinitely, and it's often to cover physicians who are there, maybe on vacation, maternity leave, or who experience an unexpected absence. It could even be just because of high patient volumes and needing a little bit extra help. It's a concept that really seems to be picking up steam, especially as healthcare organizations are struggling to meet their staffing needs. Actually, close to 90% of hospitals use locum tenens in some capacity, and I personally think that's only going to increase in the future. Now, my specialty is cardiothoracic surgery. I practiced in Dallas for nearly 12 years and built a very busy practice. I'd get calls and emails, texts from locums recruiters, and I just ignored them by and large. I didn't think it applied to me. I just wasn't interested. I hardly took any time off, and it really just didn't fit into my lifestyle. I didn't really have the interest either. Now, it may be terrible to say, but I thought locum tenens was scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like if you couldn't keep a real job, then you went into locum tenens. But I can see now how misguided that kind of thinking had been. I just wasn't exposed to locum tenens. I didn't know much of anything about it. Where I did my residency and fellowship, those facilities didn't use locum tenens, at least not in my specialty. I just never thought that locum tenens was something that was for me. Well, toward the end of 2022, there were a lot of changes at my hospital. We had several staffing crises, a few changes in the administration, and the situation became strained to the point where I was having difficulty being successful. Ultimately, I resigned in January of 2023. I took some time off, spent a lot of time reading, praying, spending time with my family, and I still didn't even think about locum tenens. My main focus was finding another full-time permanent job. Now, one thing for me is that I've never felt led to leave Dallas. My wife and I have 8 kids. We own a small business. It's called Bahama Bucks. It's a frozen dessert franchise. And I've just never felt like it was in God's plan for us to leave the city. If we were willing to move, I think I could get a full-time job because the market is quite favorable for cardiothoracic surgeons right now. And plus, I had training and expertise in some quite complex types of operations, such as robotic lung surgery and robotic heart surgery. Well, I was at the zoo one day with a family and I got a call from a recruiter. Usually I don't even answer the phone if it's a number I don't recognize, but for some reason I answered and started talking to the guy, and we talked about locums. And he mentioned something called the IMLC. Well, I'd never heard of it. Never once. He said, yeah, it's cool. It's this cooperative program with several different states where you can get one license pretty quickly, actually, and then you can get a license in other participating states. And actually, Texas is a participating state, so this would be a way where you could pretty easily get a license in another state. Well, it was like a light bulb went off in my brain because in the job search, I had come across a few locums positions, but I thought, well, I don't know how that's going to work out. It would take me 3, 4, maybe 6 months to get a medical license in that state, because that was my experience with Texas. Then it might take 2 or 3 more months to get credentialed at a hospital. How in the world am I going to plan where I want to be working in 6 to 9 months? Won't the job be taken by then? And that's part of why I never even thought about locums, because it didn't seem practical. Well, when he mentioned this IMLC, I understood that you could very quickly get a determination about where you might be able to work. So I decided to do it. I applied to the IMLC, sent all my information in, and I got my certificate 8 days later. I was like, wow, this is working. And the first state I applied for was Michigan. Got my license 4 days later. I was like, wow, this is amazing. It blew my expectations out of the water. So for my first assignment, I went with an agency called locumtenens.com or lt.com, and they placed me in Michigan. The next month, the credentialing process wasn't that bad. Typically, facilities will give temporary privileges to get you on in and working, and then they'll work on your permanent or at least full-time privileges later. Well, that was the case for me. And I'll probably describe that process of my first locums position in another episode. But I got called by more and more agencies. Now I was interested and started talking to the recruiters. And altogether, I've worked with 6 different agencies, and I'd be happy to compare and contrast them sometime. But the IMLC process has been great. The fastest I got a license was in the state of Alabama. I got my license in Alabama through the IMLC in, anyone? 13 minutes. What? Yeah, I applied through the IMLC, got an email indicating the State Board of Alabama would review my application, and 13 minutes later, I got an email from the State Board of Alabama that my license had been granted. That tells me they're pretty interested to get physicians working in Alabama. Well, since then, I've covered 12 different facilities in the past 2 years. Some have been great, some have been terrible, most have been good. I think locums is only going to increase in the future because of the advantages that I've seen for myself. So let's consider a number of them. One of the first ones is flexibility and work-life balance. So one of the biggest draws to locum tenens is flexibility. You have a lot of control over your schedule, at least compared to a permanent position. And if you're in a point in your career where you want to take a break, perhaps travel between assignments, maybe your retirement age, but you don't want to get out of the game altogether, just ramp down a little bit, locums offers that kind of freedom. You can take shorter assignments, just a weekend if you want. You could just work 1 weekend a year if that's all that you wanted to do. Or you could work much more frequently. You're not locked into a given schedule. It's not like any kind of 9 to 5. You can work a lot 1 month, then take the whole next month off, even week to week. And that's often the schedule that ends up happening, or the rhythm with locum tenens is to work 1 week, be off a week, and back and forth. Plus, you can work in different regions. I keep trying to find a gig in Hawaii, but it hasn't materialized yet. But you never know where the opportunities may be, and it can be some very interesting places to work. In my case, I'm working most of the time one place or another. For instance, I worked 28 days last month. But as an example, I'm committed to being home on each of my kids' birthdays. With locums, I've got the flexibility to simply not sign up for an assignment on the days when my kids have a birthday. The same is true with Thanksgiving and Christmas. Those dates are in high demand for locums, but I can decide whether to work them or not. Now, in Dallas, in my practice, there were just 2 of us as surgeons covering the facility, so each year I worked either Thanksgiving or Christmas, and we usually flip-flopped it the next year. With locums, I have more flexibility. Another advantage of locums is avoiding burnout. Burnout has become a major crisis in healthcare, really in a number of different industries, and locum tenens can be a good way to try to mitigate that feeling of disappointment and disinterest. In addition, moving around to new locations can seem like a reset. You can build in time actually to reset between assignments, to rest, to recuperate, take a vacation, go on a cruise, whatever you want to do. But also, I've found that when I go to a new facility, it's a blank slate. I can create the persona that I want to create. I can be as kind and friendly, as funny as I want to try to be, and that's how people take me. It's a nice way to just reset the context of where you're working and have a fresh start. Another advantage is broadening your skill set. Working in different environments and with different patient populations is an amazing opportunity to expand your skills. Each locums assignment has a different mix of doctors and patients, administrators, and you learn to be flexible. You learn to grow in terms of dealing with that type of unexpected variables. Now, this can be a plus or minus. I have to admit, I was pretty set in my ways in my full-time job in Dallas. If the OR didn't have my usual supplies or equipment, I let somebody know about it. But locums is different. I can expect a facility will not have everything that I'm used to having. Now, before I go on site, I'll usually send some preference cards to the OR manager and then see what kind of supplies and equipment they have. The first day I get there, usually we'll have a little meeting and look it all over. But if they don't have something I'm used to, they're generally not going to get it because this is a temporary arrangement. And so I've got to learn how to adapt. How am I going to still do the operation effectively without all of the tools that I've grown to prefer? And that's not to mention the people. I've worked with different OR teams, perfusionists, nurses, scrub techs, and even the physicians involved. I've learned techniques from other surgeons that I hadn't seen going to different parts of the country. It's interesting sometimes how there's a way to do things in Texas and there's a way to do things in other places that sometimes you hadn't thought about before. With locums, I'm exposed to a vast array of methods and techniques, and that has helped me to grow as a surgeon. Along with that, the networking that happens has been a great advantage. I've never been too big on networking, kind of an introvert at heart. I don't usually enjoy networking events. I tend to like one-on-one interactions, but in a group setting to go out and meet people, it's really not my bag. Well, I don't have that feeling with locums. I'm meeting a lot of new people and building relationships, but it is typically one-on-one. And now, rather than just doctors around Dallas, Texas, I've met doctors and nurses, administrators all across the country, and I've enjoyed that kind of networking to meet more people and build more relationships. It's the kind of thing that I wasn't doing before locums, and my scope of influence is much broader now. Another benefit of locums is the compensation. Now, this may vary from region to region and from specialty to specialty, but in general, locums pay is better than permanent compensation. Flexibility is the number one reason why people do locums, but once in locums, pay becomes the number one factor as to why they choose certain locations. And that's because the pay is typically good. Compensation tends to be quite competitive because locums often fills staffing needs that otherwise aren't being filled. With heart surgery, for instance, if the hospital has no surgeon, that may impact their cath lab and their cardiology department. It can have a ripple effect through more than just one service line. So, hospitals are often willing to pay prime dollar to get locums providers that they wouldn't actually pay to a permanent staff member. Of course, most locums arrangements have the provider as a 1099 contractor, so you have to consider that in terms of pay, benefits, taxes, blah, blah, blah. We can go into all of that in the future, God willing, but the point is that even accounting for all of that, the pay tends to be higher than with permanent employment. Some arrangements cover travel, housing, and licensing expenses, which obviously helps as well. One thing on the financial side I've been disappointed in, though, is that supportive costs are not usually covered. What I mean is my STS membership, the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Any self-respecting CT surgeon is a member, but I've not found a locums agency or hospital willing to pay for that membership for me. It's $1,000 a year. That's a cost that my hospital in Dallas paid on my behalf. Now I have to pay it for myself. Same thing with my loupes, the special glasses that surgeons wear that magnify what we're looking at. Those usually cost about $1,500 or so. Now, mine are fine right now, but if they break, I'll be on the hook to repair or replace those because no facility and no locums agency is going to do it for me. In the past, my permanent employer in Dallas was willing to cover that expense. In addition, CME is not generally covered. So before I had an annual stipend that I could spend, I could go to Hawaii and have time at a conference. Now that's all on my dime, and there's no facility that's going to pay it on my behalf. It's just something to consider. Even when you accommodate that expense, locums pay is typically higher than permanent. Another advantage to mention is that you can test out different work environments. So for instance, let's say you have a job offer from a facility, you have a decent feeling about it, but you're not sure if you really want to commit to moving there and becoming a permanent part of the program. Locums may be a way to test out the waters. You can suggest to the administrators, hey, I'm really liking your program. It's a big stretch for me, though, to be moving there with my family, blah, blah, blah. Could I come as a locums provider for some trial period, maybe 3 months, and I can see how you guys do things, you can see how I do them. It could be a great way to test out that environment and see if it's a good fit. That way, if you're not really into the facility after that period of time, you simply don't renew your locums assignment there, or you don't take your permanent job, and they're still feeling good about you. That would be different, though, if you sign up for a permanent job and within 6 months left, nobody's probably going to give you a glowing recommendation for your next position. So locums can be a way to try out new places even when you're interested in permanent employment there. So locums has many benefits. If you're looking for flexibility and schedule, locums may be for you. You can learn new skills, network. There's excellent pay typically, and it can be a great way to try out a program before you commit to moving to full-time employment. Now, be sure you check out the next episode to learn about some of the drawbacks of locums and things to consider before jumping in to the deep end. Thanks for listening. May God bless you as you bless others on your journey.